So, my spiritual awakening. I guess it started in 2006. That was when I was introduced to the movie The Secret, which talked about the law of attraction. And because I was so new to that world, I was completely hooked. Prior to that, I had gotten out of a very toxic, unhealthy, dysfunctional relationship. And for the longest time, I was trying to avoid the whole eat, pray, love cliche. You know, where you have a bad breakup and you go on a spiritual journey to find yourself? Well, I resisted that idea for a really long time. Not because I am hating on that book or anything like that. I actually read that book and even watched the movie. But I just didn't want to be that cliche. So even though I resisted the whole idea of going on a spiritual journey, it just kind of fell into my lap and I couldn't say no. So after I had watched The Secret, I decided to read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. And that book completely changed my life. It was the book that initiated my awakening. It helped me to become aware of my ego, and it helped me to disidentify with it over time. I always thought that having a big ego was just someone who was arrogant or full of themselves. But after reading that book, I realized that I had a very strong ego. And although it wasn't arrogant so much, it was more that it was an inferior ego. So my ego was that I always felt like I wasn't good enough and that it always cared about what people thought. So much so that it was very paralyzing. I would always, as a survival mechanism, just be a people pleaser, do and say things that in hopes that people would like me. So I always had to feel like I'd have to put on an act to be likable, to always be thought of as a nice, good person by other people. It was really hard for me to be myself. I didn't really even know who that was. So through reading the book, I got to see all the patterns that I had, all the programs for surviving out in the world, out and socializing and things like that, because I didn't realize how much it ran me until I started to become aware of my ego, of the voice in my head. And the voice in my head was very toxic. It was not nice whatsoever. It was always talking about how stupid I was, how I didn't know anything. It really was a very toxic person in my head. So Eckhart Tolle talks about in the book, he shares his own spiritual awakening, which happened basically instantaneously, overnight. Yeah, it wasn't so much like that for me at all. It's been a gradual process, which I'm obviously still on, and at times it has been slow. It's only been slow because I resisted it so much. I resisted it because I was so scared of all the changes that were starting to show up in my life, and I just wasn't ready. So I saw that I was starting to grow apart from my best friends. You know, the best friends that you would spend the rest of your life with, that you would share your major life experiences with. Well, those were my three best friends. I saw that we were starting to grow apart and I was so scared because they were the family that I chose, not the family that I was stuck with. So having that change starting to appear in my life got me really scared. I wasn't ready for it. I really resisted that whole idea of my life changing, but I knew deep down that it was inevitable, that change was going to happen, and unfortunately that was going to be one of the first unraveling of my old life. And that's why initially with my spiritual awakening, that's why it took so long and it was so slow, was because I was resisting it the whole time. So in 2010, I went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat. I had never meditated before, but always wanted to. I had heard about all the benefits of it, and I decided to go all in and just immerse myself in those 10 days and practice meditating. It was probably one of the best experiences in my life, most likely because it felt like it was a vacation from myself. I finally got to be my true self, I guess you could say, where I was able to just be really quiet, go inward, focus on the meditation, and not have to talk to anyone. And I think that was one of my favorite parts about it, because being around people, I guess I always felt like I had to put on an act. I always had to behave a certain way, which I knew deep down wasn't truly who I was. It was almost like a survival mechanism, just so that I can be liked and be thought of as a nice person. I guess I just never felt secure about myself, that if I were being my true self, that people would actually like me. So I didn't have much confidence in that area. So I always relied on being whatever the other people wanted me to be, at least what I thought they wanted me to be. So being at that meditation retreat definitely felt like that was what my soul needed. But I have to admit, one of the regrets that I do have is that I didn't maintain my meditation practices afterwards very diligently. So I definitely missed out on maintaining all the hard work that I had done for those 10 days, because I worked hard to do my meditation practices and I got lots of good results with it. I hadn't tried so hard in anything like that before. Because even after I started to meditate again more regularly, I saw how challenging it was. I basically had to restart all over again. All the hard work I did in those 10 days were completely gone. I totally took it for granted, so I didn't maintain it afterwards. So although the meditation retreat was very challenging, I personally had a really good experience from it. I used to be a really angry person, but I didn't show it. I repressed as much as I could of it. And only those, unfortunately, who were closest to me got to see that angry side of me here and there. I mean, even when I was drunk, my friends would call me a mean drunk, because I guess I felt a lot less inhibited. So I was a really angry person. But through this meditation retreat, I got to get rid of that. It basically took off a layer of that anger, and it hasn't shown back ever since, luckily. So that was definitely a really big benefit for me. There was also another interesting thing. I noticed that there was kind of this subtle, joyful state that kind of lingered in the background of my life. It didn't last long, but it was there, and it was really an amazing feeling to have. And alongside with that, there was this kind of subtle but constant tingling at the top of my head. I didn't really know what that was, and I mean, I still don't, but it was really just interesting to have that kind of sensation going on, and it definitely went alongside with that joyful state. Like I said, that state didn't last long, but it was definitely a nice glimpse into what's possible. So I guess it was just there to show me what could have been possible if I maintained my meditation practices, but I didn't. The other thing that came out of the meditation retreat was that I was completely stripped of my personality. I had gone through another dark night of the soul, or dark night of the ego, whichever way you'd want to call it, but I'll just call it dark night. So I have had other dark nights before this, but this one, after the meditation retreat, was definitely much more stronger than the other ones. And I basically felt so vulnerable, so naked, because I guess I really relied heavily on my personality to kind of get through with life. But I knew it was the false self. So I knew who I was being wasn't really the true me, but I didn't know who I really was. So I felt very awkward. I had relied on this false personality to get me through social settings, to basically go out in the world and put up this act to get me through in life. And now I knew that that wasn't really who I was, and it was completely fake. But I felt so vulnerable without it. It felt like I was going through a second adolescence. You know, that awkward stage when you're a teenager, you're figuring out who you are, and so it's kind of awkward and you're going through it. And I felt like I was experiencing that all over again. So I became socially awkward. It was so strange. I really felt so uncomfortable, so awkward. So I think that's why I resisted this stage of my life so much. I also had this really strong desire to get into hermit mode. I really didn't feel like socializing anymore. I felt like it was such a drag. I really wanted to be by myself and just be quiet. But again, I resisted it. I resisted it for so long that I became very resentful towards people in general. I was feeling really antisocial, but yet I wouldn't listen to that part of me of wanting to go into hermit mode. I still socialized, I still did things with people, but I hated it. And I think I was just really resentful towards everyone and everything because I just didn't listen to myself. I basically just denied that I was feeling that way and I went out and just lived life as usual. So it was completely my own fault. So eventually I allowed myself to get into hermit mode. I cut back all my socializing. The only socializing I would do would be to go to major events like weddings or baby showers, things like that. And the more I allowed myself to be by myself, to get into hermit mode, that was when I hit rock bottom. In 2016, I got into a dark night depression that was on and off, but mostly on, for almost 4 years. So nothing specific really happened. All of this was internal. I knew that this was the work that I had been avoiding this whole time. This was the real work I had to do. I knew I had to deal with my heavy pain body, my childhood wounds at some point. And it was the most challenging and most painful experience I have ever had in my life so far. I don't really want to get into it right now in this video because it'll make it extra long, so it'll have to be in another video. But it's definitely been the most challenging time in my life that I didn't even know how I would make it to the other side. It was a very, very challenging experience, and I didn't know how long it was going to last. The fact that it went on for years was very discouraging. I didn't know how long it would go on for, but luckily by the summer of 2020 was when I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. My deep states of depression started to come around a lot less and with a lot less intensity. And I was actually starting to feel good for once in my life. I was able to start living a bit more normal of a life. I was able to do things again, which was a very big relief. I remember innocently thinking to myself by the end of that, at the end of 2020, that although I had done a lot of healing and a lot of my emotional work, that the one thing I still struggled with was the whole idea of self-acceptance. And so what came after? I had another dark night at the beginning of 2021. Luckily, because I had so much practice over the last almost 4 years of dealing with my dark night depression, I was able to get through with this one, luckily all right. Although it was still very painful, still very challenging. I had to deal with my issues around worthiness and self-acceptance because I struggled so much with that. Deep down, I hated myself. So that was another layer that was deep-rooted that I had to deal with. And I saw how much fear I had. I had so much fear around being seen, being heard. It was so much so that my life had revolved around living in a way that would keep me safe from being seen. I would do my best to be invisible everywhere I went, to not be heard. I had a lot of, painful experiences around that. So I had to deal with those deep-rooted, unconscious fears and how I dealt with that. So that's where I'm at with my journey right now, and that's how my whole spiritual awakening happened. So I remember at the beginning of my journey, I would go on YouTube and try to look up anything around spirituality or dark night of the soul, and there was absolutely nothing on those topics back then. Obviously nowadays, it's so different. You could find everything to do with spirituality on YouTube, but there was nothing on there at the beginning of my journey, and I felt so alone. Luckily, I had, one person to talk to about this kind of stuff, but they weren't really going through the same experience as me. So I still felt alone even though I was able to talk about it. And if you know me, you'd know that I would never in a million years put out videos like this talking about my personal experiences, my personal stories, because I'm a really private person. I don't like sharing a lot of my life to many people because it doesn't feel safe for me, I guess. I didn't even like the idea of going back to work on Monday mornings and having to talk about my weekend with my coworkers. It wasn't anything personal towards them. It was just I didn't really feel that comfortable to do that. I just prefer to keep myself closed up and not talk about these kinds of things, not share about my life to other people. I don't even do social media. I got rid of my Facebook years ago. I didn't even get Instagram at all until recently because I decided to get it because of this channel, but I don't even know if I'll use it. So I would have never thought that I would make an attempt to create videos around this. But I guess because of my personal experience of feeling so alone on my journey at the very beginning, I hope that sharing my story will help someone else not feel so alone on their journey.